Hello everybody, I'm Alan Wakim with the Sons of History, and welcome to Tuesday Night History Live. We are doing a series on the Bill of Rights. Last week we did the first part of the First Amendment, or not so much the first part, but some of the parts of the First Amendment, namely dealing with like the freedom of expression, the freedoms that we're witnessing with the protests, where you have the freedom of speech, freedom to petition for grievances. Today, we're going to discuss more on the first part of the First Amendment, which has to do with the establishment of a church, of the Establishment Clause. And I will read it to you so that you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And it goes on and talks about the abridging of speech and all that. So we're going to discuss all this. What I would like for you to do is grab a drink so that this will be bearable to you. Today I'm drinking I'd say Gentleman Jack and 7. Good stuff. And as usual, if my friend Marlene Devia is watching from New Jersey, she's in a hospital on a ventilator. She had a stroke. We love you, we miss you, and please get better because we do miss you on the AMC Turn page. Okay, now, why was there a Constitution? Why was there a Bill of Rights? Why do we have the First Amendment? We have to look at our history, and since we are a history show, you're in luck because I can provide you with insight on the history, on the historical aspects, why certain things happened the way they did, and why we ended up with the freedoms that we did, and how people are interpreting the freedoms. And we'll also discuss what the founders said, not what the modern day attorneys are saying, but what the founders were saying. Okay, now, what we're going to start off with is we will discuss religion itself. Now, in the United States, you had, or what are the United States now, back when they were colonies, you had people fleeing from Europe for a variety of reasons. Now, one of them was because of religious persecution. Or I should say most of the European powers, if not all the European powers, had an established church. Now, that's where remember the word establishment, or established, because it's very important in the vocabulary. England had the Church of England. It used to be Catholic until Henry VIII had a little fight with the Pope because he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon and Mary Anne Boleyn. The Pope said no, so he created his own church, the Anglican Church. He also had Martin Luther when he started his Lutheran Church. You had the Calvinists. Now the Calvinists, that would be like the Presbyterians of Scotland. You have the Baptists. You have the Congregationalists, which are who the Puritans are. And you have the Dutch Reformists. So all these different churches, they still believed in the same thing, but their approach to it was different. For instance, some churches did not believe in a hierarchy, like the Church of England and the Catholic Church had bishops. Some of the Calvinists did not have such a structure. Some of them, like the Baptists, felt that you should only be baptized as an adult, whereas maybe the Congregationalists or Presbyterians thought, you know what, you can baptize babies. So, I mean, these were little small differences, but it did create some problems. Now you did have the Puritans. You actually had the Pilgrims came first to Plymouth Bay, and then you had the Puritans who showed up at in Boston. The Pilgrims were a little bit more radical than the Puritans. So now in Europe itself, you had all these religious wars. In France, for instance, you had the Catholic French monarchy was fighting. They were called Huguenots or Huguenots, depending on who you talk to. I think the British call them Huguenots and Americans call them Huguenots. But the Huguenots were French Protestants. If you read the book, The Three Musketeers, you'll remember where Cardinal Richelieu besieged a town or city called La Rochelle, and you had the Duke of Buckingham. He was from England. He worked for King Charles I, and they were supporting the Protestants in La Rochelle because England obviously was Protestant. So the Huguenots, it didn't work out too well for them. But that's an example. You had Catholicism. Ever since the Reformation, you had wars between the Catholics and the Protestants. Even before the Reformation, the Catholics themselves were having problems. They had a pope in Avignon, France, and they had a pope in Rome. And at one point, they even had 3 different popes because they all couldn't agree. You had the schism between the Orthodox Christians and the Catholics when the Patriarch of Constantinople refused to submit to the Bishop of Rome. And what happened was that all these countries in Europe, they had official churches. So if you were not a member of the official church, you could be hanged. You could be burned at the stake. Joan of Arc, for instance, she got burned at the stake during the 100 Years' War. Now, there was something called the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War started because Protestants and Catholics in the Germanic states, they got into a fight, and it spread to some of the other major powers. It spread to England. It did spread to France. And I did mention the religious wars of France. They just realized, the founding fathers realized that, we can't allow this to happen in the United States. Now, the different colonies, they did have their own established religions. Massachusetts and Maine, which were one colony at the time, as well as New Hampshire and Connecticut, they were the Puritans, the Congregationalists. Rhode Island didn't have Rhode Island was kind of a haven for the religiously persecuted. Roger Williams was kicked out of Boston, and he formed his own state, or his own colony, which was a haven, like I said, or an asylum for people of different religions that they could live. So Rhode Island didn't have an official established church. Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, they all had established churches. Pennsylvania, Delaware did not. Now, Pennsylvania did start off more Catholic, but then you had the Quakers showing up. But there wasn't an official established church. So, you had, like I said, you did have some states that had them and some that did not. Now, we have the Revolutionary War takes place, okay? When we declared our independence from Britain and we became a nation, there was a debate going on how to create this new union. Now, in 1754, Benjamin Franklin presented a plan of union in Albany for the 13 colonies. Now, here's the thing about what a lot of people don't understand, is that those 13 colonies were 13 countries. They had their own religion, they had their own culture, they did things differently, they saw things differently. They behaved differently. The people of Massachusetts were nothing like the people of Virginia. So when Benjamin Franklin introduced the plan of union in Albany, it was rejected. The people of the 13 colonies didn't want to submit to one power or to like a central government. They liked their autonomy within the British Empire. So it was kind of a difficult road to try to form some sort of a union. Now that was right before the French and Indian War. So now here comes with the events that took place in Boston. The 13, First Continental Congress, there were 12 of them, but in the Second Continental Congress, Georgia decided to show up. So you have the 13 representatives, or you have the representatives of the 13 colonies that couldn't agree on how to create a union. Sam Adams, for instance, of Massachusetts, did not want to submit to a powerful central government. When it was agreed to have when they decided to become independent, many of the delegates did not want their colonies to submit from one king in London to another king somewhere maybe in Philadelphia. So there had to be a lot of compromise. So there was something called the Articles of Confederation. Now, I do have a replica of it somewhere around here. Yeah, here it is. This is the Articles of Confederation. Now, the Articles of Confederation, important because this is what our country, this was the law of the country at the time. It was left the central government very weak. There really wasn't much power, but it was kind of like, look, we're here in perpetual union. We have a common enemy, being Great Britain. So let's all work together. It's kind of like NATO, where if one country's attacked, then the rest of the other colonies or the other states now will come in their mutual defense. Now, this is a book that you can purchase. It is the Articles of Confederation, and it'll kind of give you some ideas. But it was purposely made to leave the government weak. It's what they wanted. Well, we won the Revolutionary War, and whoops, hate that little thing. I'm going to take a quick sip. Hold on. We won the Revolutionary War, but then these people, like in Massachusetts and in other areas, were losing their farms to bankers or because of foreclosures. And they were getting kind of pissed off, and rightfully so, because all this land was theirs, and now it's like there's the tyranny of eastern Massachusetts imposing all these taxes and whatnot on us. So they rebelled. It's known as the Shays Rebellion. Well, it was very difficult to put down Shays Rebellion because there was no federal government to get all the 13 states organized to put down the Shays Rebellion. And there was no taxation system. So, each state had its own taxation. They had their own banks. They had everything. So they decided to have a convention, a constitutional convention. Now, it didn't start off that way. It was more of to tweak the Articles of Confederation, make it a little bit stronger. But what they ended up with was it's 4 pages, but this is the small version. This was finally signed in September 17 of 1787. They met in May, but in September 17, 1787, they had the Constitution. Now, the Constitution does not have a Bill of Rights. So George Mason, who had an active part of this, decided, I'm not going to sign it. He wanted a Bill of Rights. Now, if you read, I highly recommend getting the Federalist Papers. James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton wrote the Federalist Papers. Now, in Article 84, they state that there's no reason for a Bill of Rights. Rights at the time were considered inalienable, and at the same time, all the states had their own constitutions. There was a passage in here, but what I would like for you to do, if you get a chance, read Article 84 of the Federalist Papers, and in it, Hamilton basically is describing how there's already these inalienable rights. We got them from, like for instance, the English Bill of Rights, John Locke. There's also the Constitution itself states emphatically that that there are all these rights that are already expressed within the Constitution. The states have their own. All the states have their Constitution. There were rights and privileges already stated in all the constitutions. See, here was the problem: was that, again, not all the people living in the states wanted to submit to a federal government. They felt like that's changing from one king to another, a king from London to the king in Philadelphia. So they were afraid of giving too much power to the central government. Adams at first was a little suspect about a strong federal government, but he later became more of an advocate for it. But Hamilton wanted a little bit more of a stronger central government, whereas the other states were not. So there had to be compromises. You had what was called Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Now, in the last couple of episodes, I did tell you about the Library of America. They have a 2-volume edition on the speeches and writings of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. they had to compromise with them. If there was no compromise, nothing was going to get done. So each state had to recognize that this was a fragile union, and at any time somebody could just get out, and they didn't want that. They wanted all 13 states to become a nation, to become a strong nation. Well, after a lot of compromise, we had the Constitution. Now the Bill of Rights. Okay, so the Bill of Rights, George Mason and two others were like, I'm not signing this until we get the Bill of Rights. Hamilton's saying, look, all the other states have a Bill of Rights. It's already expressed. No state is going to go and say, okay, we're going to take away your right to free speech, or we're going to take away your right for this or your right for that. It wasn't going to happen. So that's why Hamilton and Madison were not too keen on having a Bill of Rights. But they went ahead and did it anyway. Now, Hamilton warned everybody that if you express a right to something, let's say if you tell the government that they can't do something when they weren't doing it to begin with, then you're kind of opening up a Pandora's box. He warned about that. Now later on that did happen. But what we ended up with the Bill of Rights. There were 12 amendments. 10 of them were passed, and they became the Bill of Rights. So like the Third Amendment is today's First Amendment. Now one of the amendments, it passed, but not until the 1990s, 1993 or 1994. So of the original 12, 11 did get passed. 10 of them were ratified in 1791, but one, again, was ratified 200 some years later, which is kind of strange, but it did happen. Anyway, so now, one of the Bill of Rights was the one that we mentioned, the First Amendment, which was the Third Amendment, and that one is about the establishment of a religion, that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, here's where we're going to have a little bit of a controversy, because if you read the words of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, the Constitution, and especially the Bill of Rights, was a muzzle on the federal government. The states did not want a very strong federal government because they wanted their own sovereignty. So the Bill of Rights was written in a way to kind of tell the states and the people, okay, listen, we'll prove to you that we are not going to be another tyrant like King George III. So, if you read the freedom of religion part, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay, what's my point? This is my point. The First Amendment states that the federal government's Congress cannot create a national church like a Church of England, nor can they respect a law for the establishment of a national religion. Okay, so what they didn't want, France, Spain, the Papal States, Catholic, England, Church of England, they didn't want a Church of America. That was one of their biggest fears. Now, the Founding Fathers were religious. If you look at the Enlightenment, had a lot to do with how the documents were written. Our Founding Fathers were not all Christian. They were also not all deists, and deism is an important topic. Deism is where you have an almighty God. He creates the universe, but then kind of has a hands-off approach to it all. Now, some people who were like extreme deists, Ethan Allen and Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine wrote The Rights of Man and Common Sense and The Crisis. So Thomas Paine and Ethan Allen were deists. On the Christian side, you had men like John Jay, who was considered one of the 7 founding fathers. John Jay went with John Adams and Benjamin Franklin to Paris. They negotiated the Treaty of Paris, which was how we got our independence recognized from Britain. So John Jay is also one of the guys who wrote the Federalist Papers. So John Jay was a Christian. Sam Adams was a Christian. They were very devoted to their religion. Now, in between, you can have a whole array of people. You have, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Madison, Monroe. All those guys, Alexander Hamilton, all those guys were in between what you would call Christian and deists. A lot of them called themselves Christian deists. I'll give you an example. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson believed in Jesus. He thought Jesus was the greatest philosopher ever. And one of his greatest regrets was that the people who practiced Christianity didn't follow the religion to the letter, because he is quoted as saying that if people followed Christianity to the letter, to what Jesus uttered, everyone in the world would be a Christian. He also, as a copy, he also wrote his own Bible. Thomas Jefferson did not believe that Jesus was, he didn't believe in the Trinity, where the Christians say God is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, he didn't believe that Jesus was part of the Trinity. John Adams is actually almost all of them. John Adams didn't believe that. John Adams was what we would call today a Unitarian. But Thomas Jefferson did write his own Bible, and he took some of the miracle passages and like Revelations, stuff like that. He took them out of his Bible and just put in like some of the words of Jesus Christ. And so you have the Christian, or you have the Jefferson Bible. John and his wife Abigail, they were Unitarians. They'd be considered Unitarians today. They were Congregationals. They were dissidents from the Church of England. And they did not also believe that Jesus was. They loved Jesus. But they thought that he was like a great spokesman for God. Same thing with Madison, Monroe. Benjamin Franklin believed in an almighty God, but he also didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, the Christ. So that's where our founding fathers lay. So you have a mixture of Christianity and the Enlightenment, which is how we ended up getting the documents that we have. If you're going to ask, okay, is the United States, was it ever a Christian nation? It depends on who you ask. Officially, no, we've never been a Christian nation. But I'm going to read to you some of the words of the founding fathers and those who worked with them as to how the United States was. Now, with the First Amendment, Congress, it says Congress, that's the Nancy Pelosi Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Because the Bill of Rights was written in such a way, and the Constitution was written in such a way to put a muzzle on itself and to show its protections to the state and to the people, and this is where the controversy comes in. What this means is that the federal government, Congress's federal government, cannot create a state or an established religion. It does not prevent states from having an established religion. I know a lot of people are like, what? No, that's how it was. Like I said, almost all the states, I think it was Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Rhode Island did not have established churches. The other 9 did. 4 had Congregationalists, and the rest were Church of England. So what the First Amendment was stating was that, yes, there will be kind of a wall of separation, but that wall of separation is between Congress, the federal government, and the states. Now, a lot of people like to quote the letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to Danbury Baptist Church in Connecticut. Danbury is famous from Sybil Ludington's 40-mile ride, her little midnight ride. If you ever get a chance to read about Sybil Ludington, she was a teenage girl who rode twice as far as what's his name? Paul Revere. He rode twice as far as Paul Revere. Okay, so the people of Danbury, Connecticut, were Baptists. Connecticut was a Congregationalist church. They were concerned that the government of Connecticut might later on make things difficult for the Baptists. And so they wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson, who had just been elected president, saying, hey, we're glad you became president. Thomas Jefferson wrote the church back, and he told them that we have this wall of separation of church and state, and he emphasized the part about how the federal government will not create an established church. So when you get the chance, read the letters that Thomas Jefferson wrote. What this basically comes down to is this. The federal government cannot have a national church. We can't have a national religion. But states can. I know you're like going, wait, no, BS. Okay, now, that's not the way it is now. I'm doing this presentation based on what the Founding Fathers did. All that changed with the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment changed everything. And this is why we have so many court cases going to the Supreme Court. If you look, I have a list of some of the landmark Supreme Court cases. The first big one was Reynolds versus United States in 1878. This was the first big religious case that went to the Supreme Court. Now, this had to deal more with Utah and the polygamy case. But that was really the first big case because, you had a sect, you had the Mormon Church. They're not like that now, but the Mormon Church back in those days believed in polygamy. They practiced polygamy. This case came in to, basically, it was to tell the people of Utah, hey, listen, if you want to be a part of the United States, you're going to have to knock it off. You're going to have to quit. You have to get rid of polygamy. Now, there was something called accommodationism. Now, George Washington told some of the Quakers back in those days that the Quakers, if they didn't want to fight, they didn't have to fight. So there was this belief that you come here to the United States to escape religious persecution from Europe. You come here, you can practice your religion. Now, you can either practice it or you don't have to practice it. Thomas Jefferson once stated that whether you believe in 20 gods or no gods, it's not going to matter to me. It doesn't harm me in any way. John Adams also stated that nobody should, if you're an atheist, nobody should touch you, coerce you, force you into any type of religion, punish you for it. America is a land where you don't even have to be religious. But Thomas Jefferson, he specifically mentioned that any Christian, whether they're Catholic, any sect of Christianity, Jews, Muslims, he called them Mohammedans, Muslims, Hindus. He specifically stated, you're protected here. You can come here and you can practice your religion. The states can do what they want. Remember, we're talking in the 1780s, 1790s. The states can still do what they want, but the federal government had to build a wall. That's what the wall originally was. The wall was between the federal government and the states. That's where the separation was. The states could have their established religion. The states could give preference to religion. A lot of the states had established churches into the 1800s. If you don't believe me, take a look. Read it yourself. You'll find it. It's in there. So, but the federal government cannot create an established church. We can't give any preference to a church. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that it's anti-religious. It doesn't mean that you can't display something, express your religious beliefs. Keep in mind that George Washington, when he swore on the oath, when he swore his oath on his inauguration, he had a Bible with him. And then he went to church afterwards. All of them, they went to, George Washington went to church. Now, he didn't take communion, but he went to church all the time. A lot of the, there were church services, there were religious services. A few days after Thomas Jefferson wrote that letter to Danbury Baptist Church, he went to a Christian service in Congress. Look it up. If you doubt it, look it up. So and this is where all the interpretation, and you're walking a fine line. It's not to put a muzzle on people. It's a muzzle on the government. That's what the Constitution is. That's what the Bill of Rights is. It's a muzzle on the federal government, not the states, not the locals, the federal government. It's to tell the state governments, hey, look, we recognize your autonomy, your independence. We are one nation for a variety of reasons. Common defense being one of them. So this is what I'm trying to get at. Please, I advise you to read it for yourselves. Read the words of the Founding Fathers, and you will see. Now, this is, again, prior to the 14th Amendment. Now, when the 14th Amendment came about, that kind of changed everything. We're incorporations, incorporating the state laws with the federal laws. So now, I mentioned the court cases. The big court cases that were given to the Supreme Court, 1878 was really the first big one. After that, in 1961, you started having case after almost every year, just about every year, you started having cases coming to the Supreme Court. Braunfeld versus Brown, 1961. Tarcaso versus Watkins, 1961. You had Sherbert versus Verner, 1963. Engel versus Vitale. School District of Arlington Township, Pennsylvania versus Shemp. These are all 1963. Murray versus Curlett, 1963. Lemon versus Kurtzman, 1971. Wisconsin versus Yoder, 72. Stone versus Graham. This went up to 1980. Marsh versus Chambers, 83. Lynch versus Donnelly, 84. Wallace versus Jaffrey, 85. Estate of Thornton versus Kendra, 85. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Now, in the most recent cases in 2005, you had these 10 Commandment cases, the Van Orden versus Perry. You had McCreary County versus the American Civil Liberties Union. It escalated after the 14th Amendment. Granted, yes, it was 100 years after the 14th Amendment, but, I mean, it just wasn't a big deal back in those days. Everybody was religious. Alexis de Tocqueville, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. In his book, which I do have a copy of, Democracy in America, it's one of the books that I recommend. Alexis de, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville. He was stating that, when he visited the United States, he noted that Christian denominations, he was talking about the Christian denominations, and he was saying that the sects that exist in the United States are innumerable. They all differ in respect to the worship which is due to the Creator, but they all agree in respect to the duties which are due from man to man. Moreover, all the sects of the United States are comprised within the great unity of Christianity, and Christian morality is everywhere the same. Christianity, therefore, reigns without obstacle. By universal consent, the consequence is that every principle of the moral world is fixed and determinate, although the political world is abandoned to the debates and experiments of men. So, was America a Christian nation? The government? No. The society? Yes. Now, around 1770, it's estimated there were only 1,000 Jews in the United Colonies. The first census was around 1790, and the number of Jews was less than 1,500, 1,200, something like that, less than 1,500. So Americans were primarily Christians. Yes, now you had some of the slaves were Muslims themselves. But the society of the United States was a Christian nation. It was a Christian nation. It's just that the government was not. The government purposely made sure that it was a secular government, the federal government, that is. So, federal government, secular, society was Christian. Here's one more. I'm going to give you another example here. Now, we went to war with the Barbary Pirates. This is why we have our Navy. If you listen to the Marines from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, those were the Barbary Pirates. Now, there was a treaty that was signed with one of the Barbary Pirates. And in it was an Article 11, which stated that the United States, now this is in the English text. In the Arabic version, it wasn't in there. But in the English text, it was written that the United States is not a Christian nation. Well, that kind of upset. Yeah, it's right here. As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity between the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims. He called them Muslimen. Now, John Adams said this because he stated that, look, we're dealing with Muslims and we don't want them to assume that this is a war between Christians and Muslims. So this is why it was worded like that. Again, it wasn't in the Arabic version, it was in the English version. So the treaty was signed, but there was a lot of dissent and a lot of people were upset, such as Adams' Secretary of War, James McHenry, Fort McHenry. Now, he protested the language of Article 11. He wrote to the Treasury Secretary, Oliver Wolcott, and said, "The Senate, my good friend, and I said so at the time, ought never to have ratified the treaty that alluded to with the declaration that the government of the United States is not, in any sense, founded on the Christian religion. What else is it founded on? This act always appeared to me like trampling upon the cross." We later went to war again with the Barbary Pirates. This time, Thomas Jefferson was the president, and we ended up defeating them. They signed a treaty with us, another treaty. And in that treaty, which was ratified, Article 11 was completely removed. That language was completely removed. We were at peace with them until the War of 1812, when we went to war with Britain, and then they started attacking, the Barbary Pirates started attacking American shipping again. When that war was over, then we had the second war with the Barbary Pirates, and we haven't had any conflicts with Barbary Pirates since then, mostly because the European powers invaded North Africa and made them colonies. So, okay. So, in those days, people felt that America was a Christian nation, both government and society. But if you look at the official languages, if you look at the writings of the founding fathers themselves, they wanted to make sure that there was no national religion because something could happen in the future. They did not want any people of religion being persecuted for any reason or having one religion having preferential treatment over another. They don't want the Baptists having preference over, say, the Anglicans, stuff like that. They left it to the states. They said, you states, you 13 states, you deal with religion. We're not going to allow it. So, the original government was not meant to be the big behemoth that it is now. So, all right. I gave as much information as I can. I told you all the different laws, all the, I know that Jefferson and Madison and Adams, they were all happy that people could come here and practice their religion as they pleased. They themselves practiced their religion as they pleased. They themselves went to church, but they made sure that nobody would be bothered because of their religion. No litmus test. It's in the Constitution. So when you see these people, these senators question someone who's up for a nomination for either the Supreme Court or an ambassadorship, and they say, oh, well, because you're a Catholic, blah, blah, blah. They're really not supposed to do that. But you need to talk to a lawyer on that one, a constitutional lawyer. But again, this was all before the 14th Amendment, before the Civil War. And everything changed since then. This is what the Founding Fathers intended, to let us live, let the other states live as they pleased. Our role will be very small, national defense, treaties. That was what That was what the federal government was intended. That's what Washington, Adams, Hamilton, Madison, Jefferson, that is what they intended. And we've now gone very much astray with what they intended. And if you look at our country, if they came back and looked at our country now, they would not be very happy. Books. Joe Wolverton. I highly recommend this book. It's called What Degree of Madness? It's about letting the states be great again. Highly recommend this book. If you want a book on, the Bill of Rights and states' rights, get this book. Democracy in America, Alexis de Tocqueville. I mentioned the Library of America, the Federalist Papers, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, 2-volume edition. They also have the memoirs of Jefferson, Adams, Abigail Adams, John Quincy Adams, Benjamin Franklin. You can read what they say. Don't let some modern day reporter or lawyer tell you what they're saying, or a politician. If you want to read their words, it's available. Get it. Read their words. And I suggest you get paper form, because if it's on the internet, God knows how it's been tainted. This is a good book, Founding America, Documents from the Revolution and the Bill of Rights. Articles of Confederation and the Jefferson Bible. You can find these. I actually bought these in Boston. And, of course, the Federalist Papers. Folks, if you want to know what they intended, don't listen to modern-day columnists, because they're going to feed you a bunch of crap. Read what their actual words are. It's available. And get it in book form. I think you'll be better off. Okay, I hope I didn't run you off. 45 minutes. Okay, folks, I've enjoyed this. I hope you did too. Thank you for joining me on the Tuesday Night History Live. I'm Alan Wakim with the Sons of History. Dustin Bass will have his show Thursday night on Instagram. And then Monday morning, we have our podcast every morning, 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 6 a.m. Central. Go to thesonsofhistory.com, download our podcast. I think you'll like what we have to say. I'm Alan Wakim with the Sons of History. Thank you, God bless you, and enjoy the freedoms that God gave us, which, again, is our natural, inalienable rights that the government cannot take away. Thank you very much.